go ahead and get started.
Okay.
All right, you're on.
Hey, DIS students, here's the day we've been waiting for. Author Stuart Gibbs, who I know you love. He's written 5 popular series. Y'all have read many of them, and many of them are checked out, and many even have a hold on them. Please join me in welcoming popular author Stuart Gibbs to DIS.
Hi, everybody. First of all, let me say I am sorry that I cannot be there in person. I've visited your wonderful school before and had a great reception there. And, it's a bummer that this is where we are in the world right now. But it also allows me to visit you guys virtually. So I can't do exactly the same presentation that I would do if I was at your school, but I can do a kind of version of it. So I'm going to do a presentation today about the different series I do, and in that presentation I'm going to answer the question I get asked the most. Now I know a lot of you have submitted questions, and a lot of these questions were about this idea in the first place, which is where do I get my ideas? Where do ideas come from? So I will talk about that. So let me start my presentation here. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is sort of walk you through the books I do very quickly. I'll give you a quick overview of my books, and then I will get into the heart of the presentation. Then I will be leaving some time at the end of that to answer the questions that you guys have submitted already. So right now I'm going to share my screen, and so the first, right here, oops, hold on one second. I am gonna, the first thing I'm gonna put up is Spy School Revolution. This is my most recent book. This book came out about 2 years ago. It's the 8th book in the Spy School series, but it's my 21st book overall. So here are the other sort of books I did. Again, very, very quickly. I started writing with the Fun Jungle series, which is a mystery series that is set in a zoo. It's not a normal zoo. It's like a theme park zoo. It's like somebody took your local zoo and combined it with Disney World or Six Flags over Texas and created this huge new theme park called Fun Jungle that people are coming from all over the world to visit. And there's a kid named Teddy Fitzroy, whose parents both work at Fun Jungle, so he's there all the time. Teddy even lives in employee housing and gets involved solving crimes that involve animals at Fun Jungle all the time. In the first book, Belly Up, he solves the mystery of a murdered hippopotamus. In Poached, it's a kidnapped koala. In Big Game, someone has taken a shot at one of the endangered rhinos at the zoo, and Teddy's got to figure out who that is and save the rhino's life. Pandemonium, an endangered giant panda, vanishes mysteriously en route to Fun Jungle. In Lying Down, an animal outside the park gets involved in a mystery for the first time. A local mountain lion is accused of murder, and Teddy has to prove its innocence. And finally, the most recent book in this series, Tyrannosaurus Rex, which came out earlier this year, where a really expensive, valuable Tyrannosaurus skeleton disappears mysteriously from top secret dinosaur dig, and Teddy has to figure out what happened there. I also do the Moonbase Alpha series. Now, this is a very different series, and this one, it's mystery series as well, but it takes place in space. It takes place in the year 2041 on the first moon base. So 2041 it's now about 21 years in the future. We call that the near future. That is a future you will live to see. Let's see if I get my predictions right. And I'm predicting that is when our first moon base will be up. The first colonists will be moving to the moon. They'll be bringing their children. So kids your age will be moving to the moon and finding out that Star Wars and Star Trek and Guardians of the Galaxy have lied to us about how awesome space travel is going to be. It's much harder to live in space than it looks in the movies. These kids are living this cramped moon base, and there's no police up there. So when crimes occur, they actually get involved in solving them. The next series I do, there's actually only one book in the series so far, but this is the first book, Charlie Thornton and the Last Equation. Charlie Thornton is the smartest person on Earth, even though she's only 12. And because of her great intellect, she is dragged by the CIA into all sorts of action and intrigue, racing around the world, trying to track down things that some of the greatest thinkers of all time have come up with, but hidden because they feel that humanity can't be trusted with them. So in Charlie Thornton and the Last Equation, she's on the trail of a very dangerous and powerful equation discovered by Albert Einstein. And she's up against a lot of bad guys, as you can see just from the cover. I did the Last Musketeer series. Now, this is a series about a kid who goes back in time 400 years to Paris, France, 400 years ago, and he discovers that the three Musketeers were actually real people. When he meets them, they're only teenagers, so he actually unites them for their first mission, and then he actually even becomes the fourth Musketeer. So all sorts of time travel, action, adventure, swashbuckling in this series. And finally, there's the Spy School series, which is my most popular series, about a kid who gets recruited to the CIA's top secret academy of espionage. And he thinks this is going to be amazing. They're going to turn him into a top secret spy. But it turns out to be a lot harder to be a spy than he was hoping. And he gets thrown into this world of danger and action and intrigue a lot earlier than I expected. But he's a smart kid. He manages to persevere in what are now 8 books: Spy School, Spy Camp, Evil Spy School, Spy Ski School, Spy School Secret Service, Spy School Goes South, Spy School British Invasion, and as I said, Spy School Revolution. All right, so as I said, I'm going to tell you, I can't talk about where the idea for every one of these series came from, because that would take all day, but I can talk about a couple of them. And, you know, one of the reasons I like to talk about this, not just because it's a very popular question, people always asking me where I get the ideas, but also because I think a lot of the time there's a misconception that people have about how authors work, that there's a thought that we're just walking down the street, bang, an idea comes to us. It comes to us perfectly formed. We just run to our computers and start writing that idea. And honestly, nothing could be farther from the truth. A writer is often thinking about idea, working that idea out for a lot more time than we're actually doing the physical writing of the idea. We're not just thinking about that idea for a couple days or a couple weeks. We're thinking about it for months or years, or sometimes even a lot longer than that. So I thought I would walk you through that process. Now, the other thing I get asked a lot is people always want to know how long I wanted to be a writer. And the idea is a very, very long time. I wanted to be a writer for as long as I can remember. If I were at your school, I would ask those of you who are interested in writing to raise your hands right now. We can't quite do that, but I can show you a form that I got when I was in elementary school. I should point out, I did not go to elementary school 150 years ago. This was a horribly outdated form, even when I was a kid. For this right here, I mean, look at this. They broke the jobs into boys' jobs and girls' jobs, which is wrong. There's no such thing as a boy's job or a girl's job. And then here are the options they gave the girls: mother, nurse, school teacher, airline hostess, model, and secretary. Which on their own, I guess each one of those is a decent job, although I would argue mother is not a job at all. That is something you get stuck with being a parent when you have a kid. You don't get paid for that. But then this is kind of a sexist group of potential jobs. So I'm sure it's not news to all the young women out there watching that you are not limited to these jobs. But I should say to the boys, you're not limited to the 6 weird jobs they gave us either. I grew up not too far south from you guys in Texas, around San Antonio. So not a single one of my friends became a cowboy, but there it is right there. I did not see what I wanted to do, so I put author in there. But I did not really know how you became an author. In fact, I got all the way to college without knowing how anybody became an author. I wasn't even sure if you could make a living as an author. I thought maybe all authors had other jobs and just sort of wrote books on the side. So I decided that when I went to college, I should study something. I had a slightly better idea of how people got a job in that field. So I went with what I liked second most after writing, which was animals. I always liked going to the zoo as a kid. I liked going for hikes and looking for animals in the wild. I liked catching lizards and snakes. I kind of had my own zoo in our garage. And so I studied field biology. And now a field biologist is a biologist who goes out and studies animals out in the field. That's how we pretty much know everything we know about animals, from field biologists. But I was going to actually a university with a very good field biology program, but it was in a big city. There were no wild animals anywhere around for us to study. So we had to do our studying at a zoo. This zoo in particular, the Philadelphia Zoo, I spent a tremendous amount of time doing research when I was in college. And I was there for many hours a week. And sometimes I was there before it opened in the morning. I'd be there after it closed at night. And because I was spending so much time there, I ended up spending a lot of time with zookeepers and some of the biologists who were also studying animals there, and going behind the scenes at the zoo. And because I really wanted to be an author more than I wanted to be a field biologist, I started to think that a zoo was an interesting place to set a story. And then I started to think, what kind of stories could I tell there? I hit upon this idea about doing mysteries involving animals. And then I think, well, what animals could I put at the center of my mysteries? So I just started to go with animals that fascinated me while I was working at the zoo, like hippos. Before I started working at the zoo, I believed that all hippos were kind of these docile, gentle creatures, kind of silly looking, but in fact, that was totally wrong. Hippos are actually very, very aggressive, very territorial animals. They're actually far more dangerous to humans than animals like lions or leopards, or any of the big cats in Africa. And I thought that was an interesting animal to write about. I wasn't the only person with that misconception. I decided to put that at the center, a hippo at the center of a mystery. I got fascinated by koalas. When I was at the zoo, I wasn't the only one. Our koala was incredibly popular. People would line up for a very long time to see the koala. So I put that in the middle of a mystery. I got fascinated by rhinos and concerned about that they're being poached to extinction because of their horns. So I thought that was a good center of mystery. Who doesn't like pandas? Everybody likes pandas. They're pretty rare in this country, very hard to get to see. So I thought that would be an interesting animal. I got fascinated by mountain lions, which are actually the most widespread terrestrial animal in the world after humans. You can see this one doesn't live too far away from me in Hollywood. It lives right in the middle of Los Angeles. I actually heard the other day that the first mountain lion was actually verified in the Dallas suburbs. It was caught on somebody's security camera. So I thought, man, it'd be interesting if there was a crime involving a local mountain lion. And I always loved dinosaurs. And so I took that love of dinosaurs, I wanted to write about dinosaurs, and put that into Tyrannosaurus Rex. Now, obviously, I couldn't do research for Tyrannosaurus Rex at a zoo. I had to do research for it at places like the Los Angeles County Museum of Natural History. I went to several natural history museums around the country. And one of the fascinating things I discovered is that generally the bones you see on display at a natural history museum are about 1% of the bones they have there. The rest are down in storage rooms like this, where you can just be surrounded by thousands of dinosaur femurs and mastodon teeth and all kinds of amazing stuff like this. I got very interested in how paleontologists could just look at these bones and figure out what a dinosaur looks like. And that's sort of been an ongoing process for about 150 years. What we think dinosaurs look like have changed even during my lifetime. When I was a kid, this is what we thought a tyrannosaur looked like. But now we think that one looks like this, which is pretty different. That weird sort of toupee looking thing that that is on his head there, that's not hair, those are actually feathers. That you can see that it's colored very differently. Nobody knew that dinosaurs had feathers when I was a kid, but that is the new current thinking. And so there's so much fascinating stuff to learn when you're doing research like this. And I love to find these interesting things and work them into the stories that I tell. So it's not like reading a textbook when you read the Fun Jungle series, because there's sort of all sorts of action and adventure and comedy in the books. But I do like to put fun facts about these animals in the books when I write, because that way I'm not just an author when I write them, but I'm actually still getting to be a biologist as well. Now, if I base the Fun Jungle series on working at a zoo and knowing zookeepers and biologists, I based the Moonbase Alpha series on knowing one person, and that is my good friend, Garrett Reisman. Now, I met Garrett when I was an undergrad in college. Garrett is pretty much the smartest person I've ever met in my entire life. And after school, Garrett had this job he wanted. It was a hard job to get. In the history of humanity, only a couple hundred people have had this job. But like I said, Garrett was very smart. He worked very hard. He got the job. And here is Garrett at work a couple of years ago. Garrett got to be an astronaut, which is super cool. I mean, if you don't get to be an astronaut yourself, which is like the best job ever, having a friend who's an astronaut is really the next best thing. All the astronauts moved to Johnson Space Center in Houston, and I would go down there and visit Garrett and get to do some astronaut training myself. Every time Garrett blasted off into space, I would get to go watch. So this is one of Garrett's space shuttle launches. And I got to have a pretty good view of it, as you can see. But maybe the best thing is when you have a friend who's an astronaut, they can take your stuff into space for you. So when Garrett was going to space, he made me this incredible offer. Did I want to send anything up into orbit around the Earth with him? And I jumped at the chance. One of the things I sent was my very first copy of Belly Up, my very first book. It had just shown up. I sent my first copy of my book Into Space with Garrett. And to prove it, Garrett decided to take it out of storage on the International Space Station one day. He put it up against the window and took this photograph. So this is not photoshopped or manipulated. That's belly up with the actual Earth in the background. And then Garrett emailed me this photograph from space, which is the coolest email I've ever got in my life. And I was so excited, I just turned around and forwarded the email to every person I'd ever met. Among those people were my editor and my publisher, and they called me up very excited by this photograph. And they said, wait a minute, you know an astronaut. That's amazing. And they asked me, could I write a series set in space based upon what I learned by knowing an astronaut? So I thought it was a great idea. But then I started to think, well, what did I learn? And I realized that there was a lot of disconnect between what I was seeing Garrett was really going through as an astronaut these days and what the movies portrayed space travel is like. And I'll give you one example, which is the size of the spacecraft. Now, this is a pretty typical movie spacecraft. That is the USS Enterprise from the Star Trek series. It's bigger than your school. It's enormous. It can go warp speed. It's got all these amazing things. And actually, the spacecraft movies are getting like ridiculously large. This is a dreadnought from the new Star Wars series, the last 3 movies they made. And it's been superimposed over the largest city in America. And you see it's half the size of Manhattan in New York City. We don't have a building anywhere close to that big on Earth, let alone something that can go warp speed travel between planets. Our spacecraft are a lot smaller. Now, this is an Apollo capsule. This went to the moon. There were 3 astronauts inside this capsule for 10 days. Now, the people in front of it are 4th graders. They're just to give you a little perspective that you realize that capsule is not that much bigger than those 2 4th graders there. And you realize it's not all empty space inside that capsule. It's really chock full of all the machinery needed to keep astronauts alive. There's a surprisingly small amount of space inside a space capsule. Through my friend Garrett, I've been able to get into Russian space capsules, into the new Dragon capsules, into the cockpit of the space shuttle. And all of those were significantly smaller than I had ever realized they would be. I'm not a particularly claustrophobic person, but I thought, man, it'd be really hard to be in this cramped space for that period of time. So I thought, you know what, if I'm going to write something set in space, I don't know if I want to do it in some distant future where this is the kind of spacecraft we have, where all the issues of space travel are taken care of. What if I do it in the near future? In the future, you'll live to see. And this is what space travel is going to be like in your life. It's going to be in tiny capsules like this. Still, there's no bathroom in that capsule. You have to wear a space diaper. That's something they leave out of the Star Wars movies all the time. So I thought, man, if I put kids in a world where they're dealing with the realities of space travel, that becomes a really fascinating place to set a story. Now, I told you I can't go through all the series I do, but I did want to talk to you about Spy School. Where did this idea come from? If I came up with the idea for the Fun Jungle series by knowing zookeepers and biologists, and I based the Moonbase Alpha series on knowing an astronaut, I would love to tell you that when the time came to write Spy School, I just called up my friend who was a secret agent and said, hey, what's it like being a secret agent? But the fact is, I don't have a friend who's a secret agent. Or maybe I do. How would I know? Because they are a secret agent. They can't tell their own friends what they do. They can't tell their own families what they do for a living. And I thought that is a fascinating job. I wanted to write about the job. This was the only secret agent I knew, James Bond, Agent 007. And maybe you guys have been lucky enough to see, or you've seen James Bond movie, one of the more recent ones with Daniel Craig, or you've seen some of the Mission Impossible movies with Tom Cruise, or maybe the Jason Bourne movies. There's a lot of great spy movies out there. When I was a kid, my ability to see spy movies was very limited because we did not have streaming. We didn't even have DVD players. We could only see the movie at the theaters, and this was the movie that was out, Moonraker. This is possibly the worst James Bond movie they ever made. I'm not the only person who thinks that, but you can see it's awfully cheesy. They sent James Bond into space because they were trying to compete with Star Wars at the time. It's a ridiculous movie, but it was only one I could see. And my friends and I all thought James Bond was amazing. We all ran around pretending to be James Bond afterwards. And because I wanted to be a writer, I went one step farther and I wrote some James Bond fan fiction. Sort of. This is not a James Bond story, really. It's a Jimmy Bond story about James Bond's son. So James Bond was Agent 007. Jimmy Bond is Agent 006 and a half. And it was while I was writing this story that I came up with the idea for Spy School. Because in this story, Jimmy is not really a spy. He's just pretending to be a spy, but he wants to grow up and be a spy like his dad. His dad's not around to teach him what he knows. He's James Bond. He's off traveling around the world, thwarting bad guys all over the place. So I thought, okay, Jimmy, maybe he's got to go to a top secret spy school to learn how to be a spy. So I had this idea when I was your age, maybe even a little younger than you, and I held on to it for a very, very long time, trying to figure out how to make this story work. I like to talk about this because a lot of the time there are kids out there who also want to be authors. Maybe you're trying to write a story now, and it may take you a while to get that story out there. There might be some rejection along the way, but if your story gets rejected at some point, keep going, keep working with it. I kept going with it, and it worked out eventually. I've got a whole series out of it. Kids also often want to know, is any of my books going to be turned into movies? Well, Spy School is set up at Disney right now, although the pandemic has sort of thrown a big wrench into things. But I've written the screenplay for the movie. Hopefully, we will move ahead kind of soon and go from this to this. So we'll see. We'll see. Finally, I want to talk about where Spy School Revolution came from, because this is my newest book. And not only do you have to come up with a series, you have to come up with the ideas for each book in the series. Now, this was inspired because I was actually doing school visits. Before the pandemic, traveled around quite a lot to visit schools all over the country, and I get invited a lot to the Washington, D.C. area. The books are very popular there because that's where a lot of them take place. And I was actually in the Virginia suburbs outside Washington, D.C. I had a little time between school visits. And I realized I was very close to a place called Mount Vernon, which I'd never been to. So I went over to Mount Vernon, which is a really amazing estate, one of the most beautiful homes in the country. It's been preserved the way it looked pretty much to exactly when its owner lived there over 250 years ago. The owner of this place was this man, George Washington. And while I was touring Mount Vernon, I was talking to some of the docents, and they reported to me that they found out that I did a spy school series and got very excited. And I said, "Do you know who the nation's first spy master was?" Well, it was George Washington. Now, up to this point, I knew George Washington was our first president, our first commander of our armed forces. I did not know that he was our first spy master. So with the help of the people at Mount Vernon, I started doing some research. They showed me some amazing artifacts they had about George Washington's spy ring, and his spies use things that we would think of as familiar today, like secret codes. This is a code that George Washington's spies used. They used invisible inks, not the same exact kind of invisible ink our spies might use now, but they used an early version of it. They pioneered a lot of great spy techniques, and Washington ran such a great spy ring that they were really, really integral in the defeat of the British. There were actually British generals who said that Washington didn't outfight them so much as outspied them. Washington lost more battles than he won, but he ran an amazing, effective spy ring. And so if not for them, and not for Washington spies, we might be living in a very different country today. So I thought, they're right. I wrote the spy series. Wouldn't it be great to write a story, a modern day story with Ben and all the other characters you know from Spy School, but tie it in to something that happened with Washington back during the Revolution, and make them have to uncover something that Washington himself had uncovered. So I took that idea and that was sort of the impetus for Spy School Revolution. I went with that idea and I developed a whole story based on that. The last thing I'm going to say before I get to questions here is kids always want to know what I have coming out next. I actually have 3 books coming out next year. So the first one is the next book in the Charlie Thorne series. So this is the second book, Charlie Thorne and the Lost City. And this one, Charlie is down in South America on the trail of something really mysterious and dangerous that Charles Darwin discovered on his travels around the world. If you're a fan of the Fun Jungle series, the next book in this series is Bare Bottom. This will come out in May. And as you may be able to guess, this is a mystery involving a grizzly bear. There will be a 9th Spy School book coming out in the fall next year. I don't have a title or cover for that one to share with you yet. And then in the year after that, in 2022, there will be a 3rd Charlie Thorne book. There will be a 10th Spy School book. There will be a Spy School graphic novel. Maybe there will be a Spy School movie. We'll have to see. So there is, I've got quite a lot coming on over the next couple years. All right, so that's my presentation there. I can look here there are a couple questions that you guys submitted me. So I know some of the questions may be things that we I actually did go over in my presentation, but I can answer those questions, and then we'll see where we are. We might have a little extra time. So the very first question is, do I like the books that I make? And I do. I think it would be pretty bad if an author did not like the books that they wrote. I think it's important to like the books you write, and for me, very important to write the kind of books that I would like to read. So it would be. I don't know that there's an author out there that would say they don't like the books they make. And then you could see somebody said, "Why did I want to be an author?" Which was just I always I just loved writing as a kid. I showed you that form from when I was a kid, but it was like my hobby. It was like being a kid who played sports and loved sports and wanted to be a professional athlete. I played sports. I didn't want to be a professional athlete, but I did write. I was writing all the time, and so that was I just thought, man, this is a job. That's great. So, okay, there are a couple other ones here that I announced. Oh, who's my favorite author when I was growing up? I had a lot of favorite authors, but I will share this book here, The Westing Game by Ellen Raskin, which is really one of my favorite books of all time. It's a wonderful mystery. It still holds up. I actually reread this book quite often just to see what a great author and great mystery creator Ellen Raskin was. But I also I did really love Roald Dahl growing up because he was so funny, and Donald J. Sobel, who did the Encyclopedia Brown series, which is another great mystery series. Let's see, what is my motivation to write? Which I should say, I guess that like I said, I've always had this desire to like writing. It is really just wanting to share stories with the world. Now, I did work actually as a screenwriter before. I was trying to write books when I was in high school and college, and I didn't get them published, so I decided to try my hand at screenwriting instead. But I came back to books because my son had just been born, and I did want to try and write something that he could read. I did not know that I would one day have 21 books out. I thought maybe I would just have one, but being able to write a story for my kids was one of the great motivations there. Someone's asking, what is my favorite book I've written? Which I should say is a completely legitimate question, but I don't have a favorite of my books. I really put a lot of time and effort into all of them, and so it's very hard for me to say, oh, I like this one book better than I like another book. But I don't mind if you have a favorite book. You're welcome to have a favorite book of mine. It's just hard for me to pick. How do I think of all these interesting books? I did talk a bit about inspiration, but I guess I should say that inspiration can come from anywhere. And the best way to get ideas is to just be curious. And so that means, right, that when I was visiting schools, I could have said, oh, I don't feel like going to Mount Vernon today. I just want to go back to my hotel or something like that. But I was near someplace interesting. And I thought, well, let me go see this place. And I had no idea that would inspire a book idea, but it did. And so if you sort of go through life, seeing what's out there in the world, reading everything you can, the more ideas and things you expose yourself to, the more ideas you're going to get. In Spy School, will there be a book where there's a war? To be honest, well, the new one sort of deals with the Revolutionary War, and Spy Camp deals with a Civil War reenactment. I haven't put a real war in. That's not a bad idea. I just would have to think of how to do that. Okay, so there's a couple reruns here about. Oh boy, I think I answered a lot of these questions in my presentation. Someone says, "How much do you like writing on a scale of 1 to 10?" Be honest. If 10 is the highest, I'm like at 11. I really love writing. It's great to me that that's something I can do. Someone's asking which of my series are complete and to which ones will I add more books. So right now, the Moonbase Alpha series and the Last Musketeer series are complete. The series I'm still writing books for are the Fun Jungle series, the Spy School series, and the Charlie Thornton series I'm just getting started with. So there's definitely going to be some more books in that one. And the last question here is, if I would have to get rid of any book that I wrote, what would it be? Get rid? Oh my gosh, that sounds like the worst thing ever. I guess that somebody's asking like which of those is my least favorite book, and I the same way I don't have a favorite. There's not. I'm not really answering this question, but I'm not going to get rid of any of my books. That's like the last thing I would ever want to do. When you put so much time and energy into something like this, the idea of losing it or getting rid of it is just that's a tough thing to think about. So I've gotten all the questions that were submitted. I don't know if there's if there's a way to open this up. I can ask your librarian, Miss Green, if there's if I guess kids could type in some in the chat. I don't know if we have that availability here or if we've just sort of reached the end.
Unfortunately, we don't have that capability to live chat, but
okay.
if homeroom teachers would like right now, as soon as they can, to get a few questions from their students, and they could either message or they could email them to Miss Green or myself. We can relay those questions to you.
Okay. In the meantime, I guess I could talk. This would sort of, while we wait for those questions to come in, if kids were asking, why did I like to write? When did I know I wanted to be a writer? I could show you guys something that's pretty cool, which is this is a book that I made in kindergarten because I had a school librarian who was very, very encouraging and knew I was writing all the time. So she asked me to take one of my stories, which here was called The Day the Dinosaurs Came Back. And we turned this into a book. So we took the story, she typed it up for me. You can see right here that I was not a great illustrator, but we did make this book and then put it in the school library. So now I know you guys don't use a card system anymore, but this is a card system, and I could see what other kids had checked my book out. And this was an amazingly influential thing that my school librarian did for me. When I was a kid, and this didn't necessarily make me want to be a writer anymore, but it did show me, it did allow me the opportunity to let other kids read the stories I wrote and get to interact. Kids would come up and say, "Oh, I checked your book out, and I liked the story a lot," and so that was a very powerful thing that was done, and I got me very excited about the idea that someday I could go into a library anywhere and find my books on the shelves.
That's awesome. Stuart, we are getting some questions from some classes now.
Okay.
Our first question comes from Miss Oliver's class, and they say, me and my friends are writing a book, and we're almost at our goal of 175 pages. But we are wondering if editing/revising really changes the book that much. Oh my gosh,
yes. So yes, in fact, editing is an extremely important part of the book. I will say this, there's an interesting thing these days where kids are very fascinated by their page count, by their word count, which, it wasn't back when I was a kid. It was very hard to know exactly how many words were in everything. So we never set out with word counts. I do think sometimes kids say, "Oh, this is how long a book should be. It should be 175." But it doesn't really matter. Like a book should be as long as is right for it, right? So I would encourage you guys to just write a story and say, okay, this is the best story. Oh, it only came out 150 pages. That's fine. But that said, editing is incredibly important. No author I know turns in their first draft. We actually, this is something we really discuss a lot, is how many drafts people even do. I do about 8 to 10 drafts, which is kind of on the low side. I have friends who do 40 drafts of a book before they turn it in. And I know that sometimes, especially kids, you might think like, oh gosh, do another draft of something. Why would I do that? I just worked so hard on this book. But every time you do a draft, you're making it better. And that can be really, really fulfilling. Sometimes it sounds like work, but making something better is great. When you finish that draft and you say, oh gosh, I made this book better than it was in the first draft. That's fantastic. And So there are different ways to, but the best thing to do for me is print out the book, read through it, make sure all your sentences are reading right. Reading it out loud a lot of the time is a great way to see if you've made a mistake in a sentence or something wasn't right. Read it to a friend, have your parents read it, have teachers read it. Give it to and so often people come up and say, wait, I'm not sure what this character was doing, I don't know what was happening here. Maybe you recognize something yourself that you left out of the story, or and so all those changes are important, so that someday somebody, when you get your story published, people read it and don't have issues with it. So I get notes from my editor. That's my editor's entire job, is to give me notes. But I get notes from a couple other people I trust, including my own children, and make changes based upon those ideas.
It's pretty neat that it's a collaborative effort as well.
It really is. Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's, I should point out, if I didn't, it's fantastic that you guys are writing at all. And I think that's wonderful.
We have a question coming from Miss Van de Mortala's homeroom. And they said, will you continue your Moon Base Alpha series? And also, what helps you write your books?
So sadly, the Moon Base Alpha series ended, or I ended it, I should say, and that was a big bummer for me. I really did not. I thought that series was going to go a long time, but I realized that when I set it on the moon and went for trying to make it as realistic as possible, that actually became quite limiting. And one of the big things is that no matter where you go on the moon, it's the same for the most part. I mean, the terrain changes a bit, but it's really just moon dust and moon rock, and you're always in a spacesuit, and so that was kind of limiting in like what kind of action sequences I could do, where I could send my characters. If I write something on Earth, like the Spy School series, the Fun Jungle series, I can send, if you go a mile from your house, the terrain changes pretty dramatically on Earth, but it doesn't on the moon. And so I just started to realize that series was going to start feeling repetitive if I kept it going. And I just, so it was not an easy decision, but I felt like I should end that one at 3 books. That was, oh shoot, what was the second part of that question? What helps me write?
The second part of that question was, who helps write your books?
Oh, who helps write my books? So I do. It's really the people I get notes from. I have authors that I trust a lot. Sometimes we will brainstorm a little bit together or run ideas past each other. So that's a bit. But I do have this editor, and I read my books to my kids at some point, and they help. They also will give me ideas. At the beginning, and I'll show you. I have a dog back here. That's what he does. He sits on the couch and snores all day while I work, and he actually comes up with no ideas, but he's good for moral support. So.
Great. All right, this question comes from Miss Winard's homeroom. Have you ever had an idea that you gave up on, and would you consider writing a series based on the pandemic?
Okay. Yeah, I have had ideas I gave up on. I should say part of my writing process now is that I outline. I do a lot of brainstorming on yellow pads before I ever write. So I jot down lots of ideas on these yellow pads, and I kind of fill up yellow pads. I've got yellow pads all over my office here that are filled up with ideas, and eventually those become outlines. And not every author outlines, but I find that if you outline and you know where your story is going, you have much less chance of getting stuck or getting a couple chapters in and realizing that this isn't working at all. So that's something that I do. And so since I started doing that, I have not really gotten stuck on an idea. Now, that doesn't mean it hasn't taken me a while to figure out what to do with it. Like I said, with Spy School, I spent a really long time sort of working on ideas. Space Case, it wasn't like somebody said, oh, do something set in space. Okay, I got it. It took me about 1.5 years of playing around with ideas till I hit upon the right idea for that book. So it can take a while to get an idea to where you want it to be to write it. As for writing something set during the pandemic, I don't think I'm going to do that. And I recognize that this is really like the major event of the young lives of everybody watching. You guys are, you know, saying like this, the whole world is going through this. Everybody you know is going through this. But there's a couple reasons I feel like I don't want to do that. One is if it, you know, the pandemic is already coming up on going on for a year, and if I were to shift one of my books into the pandemic. Like if I were to say, oh, I'm gonna do Spy School during this pandemic. Well, Spy School is already, I want that series to feel like it could happen anytime, or Fun Jungle like it could happen anytime. If I said during the pandemic, now I lock it into a year, and for the rest of the time anybody reads that series, it's gonna happen then. But also, you know, Spy School, the adventures tend to happen, you know, a couple of weeks apart, if I put one during the pandemic, then the next 8 books are gonna have to take place during the pandemic. And the final thing is that, although this pandemic seems like it's going on forever, it is not going to go on forever. It is going to end. And by the time I could write a book, come up with the idea for a book, write the book, and get the book out into bookstores, might be 2 years, might be 3 years. And by that point, the pandemic, this may sound crazy to you, but at some point, not too long from now, you're going to look back and say, man, that seems like it was forever ago. And maybe you're not going to want to ever think about the pandemic ever again. And so to have a book suddenly come out and be like, hey, it took place during the pandemic, you might be like, that is the last thing I want to read right now. I just want to read books about people going on and living in a non-pandemic world.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so these are some personal questions from Ms. Hartman's homeroom. What's your favorite restaurant? What sports do you like? And what are your favorite sports teams?
Oh, okay. All right. So my favorite restaurant is, gosh, there is a place here in Los Angeles called Bay Cities that I just I love that place. That's a great place. Okay, sports I like. Breaks. If I were going to go to a sporting event back when we're eventually allowed to do this again, I do like baseball. I love going to baseball games. I like watching. I like watching football more on television. I like watching soccer probably on TV and at the stadium. I am living in Los Angeles, so my favorite baseball team would be the Dodgers. You guys got our World Series this year, which was kind of a bummer. But actually, when I was a kid growing up in San Antonio, that was where the Dodger farm team was. So I actually got to grow up as a Dodgers fan, and yeah, so it was. I'm glad we won the World Series this year, but that was not the way that any of us wanted to have our World Series go. Really,
I get that. This question comes from Miss Shabana's homeroom. How long does it take you to write a book? And then, how old are you, and when's your birthday?
All right. It takes me about, once I've done all the brainstorming, from the time I sit down to start writing, it takes me about 2 years from when I start writing until that book comes out. And it's about 3 to 6 months to do that first draft. And then there's about a year of doing additional drafts on there, and then there's just final tweaks and things like that. The last 6 months, I'm not actually working on the book that much. The publisher's working on the book, but I still get called in on occasion. As for how old I am when my birthday is, I will leave this as a challenge to the students, that it is not particularly hard to find that online. And if you really, really, really want to figure that out, I will give you guys a research project to do and track that down.
There you go. So Miss Carter's class has 2 questions. One of them, though, is a potential spoiler to school, so I'm going to leave that question out.
All right.
The other question is, what college did you go to?
Oh, I went to the University of Pennsylvania, which, as you can tell, is because it was close to Philadelphia Zoo, is right in the middle of Philadelphia.
Right. Miss Shane Hall's class asked, do your children like to write? What are your kids' favorite books that you've written? And what other things besides writing do you enjoy?
Okay. My daughter has really gotten into writing recently. So she is writing quite a lot. She's not showing me anything she's written, but she is doing it. gosh, of mine. But it's been a while since I asked my kids what their favorite. We did read the new Charlie Thorne the other day, which is I could show you guys that again. This is called advanced reader copy. So sometimes kids are like, "Wait, you have it? How can you have it and I can't have it?" But this is not quite finished yet. I get sent these to sort of go through one last time to make sure it's right. And I read this to them, and they would not let me stop reading. They made me keep reading until we finished like the last 100 pages, and that hadn't really ever happened before. So they seem to be really into that one. Wait, okay. There was a third question. What was it?
Last question was, what other things besides writing do you enjoy?
Right. What do I like to? I do like to be doing stuff outside. So I like hiking. I like road biking and mountain biking, and I like skiing. I like trying to see animals in the wild still. So I've tried to go to every national park in the United States and travel around the world to wilderness areas to try and see animals out in the wild as well.
Very cool. Miss Mont's class asked, how long have you been writing for? How often do you get a haircut?
That is the first time I've ever gotten that haircut question. And it's probably changed a little bit during the pandemic because I let it get a little shaggier than normal, and then I just go get everything taken off. So I don't know, every couple of weeks for a haircut. And now I just forgot the first question. What was that first? I'm terrible remembering more than one question, apparently.
The first question was, how long have you been writing for?
Oh, how long have I been writing? So, I mean, I've been, writing since I was a kid, obviously. How long I've been a paid writer, I started actually getting paid when I was in college. One of the things I found was that there were all sorts of ways to make a living as a writer. And so I started working for a newspaper when I was in college. I also worked for TV news reporter, which started as an internship. And then I was producing television news spots, which I was actually writing. Then I shifted, I moved out to Los Angeles and Hollywood to become a movie writer. So I worked writing screenplays for movies. I developed some TV shows, but as I said, I ultimately really wanted to go back and try my hand at writing a novel again. So, but there are, and what's interesting, I think kids should know that there are all these different ways of being a writer, and I had quite a few friends in college who wanted to be writers. And it's kind of amazing to see how different everybody's career is. That I have a friend who writes Broadway shows. I've got friends who write. Who work for the news, who work for magazines, who work for online sites, who are authors as well. There are quite a few ways. And what's interesting also is that some of those have shifted. Like there was no writing for online websites or magazines when I was in college. That didn't exist, and now it's a whole new thing. There was no streaming television when I was until 10 years ago, really. And so that's a whole new art form, really, that people are writing. So there are all sorts of different ways to be a writer, and you can actually do more than one of them if you want.
All right, this question comes from Mr. Wright's homeroom. Do you plan on doing any sort of crossover events, such as having your characters from Fun Jungle and Spy School meet up?
I'm not planning a crossover this time. And I know kids are always writing to me with suggestions about ideas, and I appreciate it, but it's very hard to take idea. Like, inspiration is really just have to get struck and say, like, that's the idea. Yes, that's what I'm going to do. And I'm not saying I'm not even thinking about this, but one of the nice things about doing different series is that when you do different series, you sort of get to take a break. So I take a break from Spy School to go off and do Fun Jungle. I take a break from Fun Jungle to go off and do Charlie Thorne. And if I combine two series, then I didn't take a break from anything. I combined two of them in one thing. So it has to be this amazing idea that and I don't have it yet. So I'm keeping them separate. I might have started to drop some Easter eggs into the books to sort of indicate that maybe some of the series are connected, but I'm not, at this point, I'm not against the idea of a crossover. I just don't have it in the works.
Unfortunately, we are out of time at this point, as it is almost 11:30.
Right.
But Ms. Green, if you'd like to, do you have anything else you'd like to say?
Thank you very much, Stuart Gibbs. We have loved having you today.
All right.
Thanks.
Well, again, kids, I'm sorry I can't be there in person. Some days, you know, this pandemic will end, and I will be I'll be back in Dallas, and I'll be, you know, we'll get the North Texas Teen Book Festival going again, and I'll be able to come by your school, and so I look forward to that. So just stay tough, kids, and be safe. Keep on reading, and listen to your teachers.
All right, we'll hang on to these questions for the next time you're around.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Mr.
Right.
Have a great day.
All right, you too. Bye.